300 yards, keep right to stay on M4. Keep right to stay on M4. Continue on M4 for 4 miles.
There does seem to be new evidence gaining ground concerning what might have gone on of Durham Town when the leader of the Labour Party was there, Janet Hammersmith. The police re-investigated at number 10. They should re-investigate what happened at Durham.
Why?
No, please don't answer with a question. Why shouldn't they?
I'll answer it. Dominic Cummings. Why aren't they re-investigating him?
No, you see, you answered another question.
You don't like Labour. End of.
Ridiculous.
No.
If I didn't quote like Labour, why do you suppose Sir Keir comes in the studio every month?
Nick Ferrari at breakfast. Back tomorrow morning from 7. Listen on your radio and on Global Player. LBC. Leading Britain's conversation. LBC. Tonight with Andrew Marr.
Well, the time's 6:49. Joining me in the studio to discuss what might be cutting through on the doorsteps is Harry Cole, political editor of The Sun, and the Guardian columnist Polly Toynbee. They might not have exactly the same perspective, I warn you right now. Harry, let's start with you. You've been writing a lot about so-called Beergate. Keir Starmer, a pint of beer, £200 worth of curry, including korma, I read in your newspaper today. Now, the question is, do you really think he actually broke any of the rules?
I think on the surface, it looks like he has some explaining to do. And the problem for Keir Starmer is that every time he seems to open his mouth, he seems to make things a little bit worse. Like today, he said there was no restaurants or pubs open, so he had to have a takeaway. That's not true. It took us about 5 minutes to work out there was a pub 0.2 miles away that was serving that night.
So they'd have been in a worse state had they all gone to the pub.
Well, no, Keir Starmer, but 6 people could eat outdoors on April the 30th, 2021. We're in stage 2 out of lockdown. He says him and his core team were there. They were working. They're taking a break from work, and they'll carry on doing that. Could easily have been done in a pub. So it's just a little bit. It's just a little bit ironic that he seems to be wheeling out exactly the same terrible excuses that Boris Johnson has spent the last 6 months trying to convince us were a reality. And actually, Keir is the one that's raised the bar on this. He has hammered repeatedly that any minor infraction by a politician of the rules is worthy of a police investigation, except his own.
Well, this is the question, Polly. Is there really such a difference between curry and a beer on this side of the table and a Tupperware box containing a cake on the other side of the table?
Well, we've had, I think, 12 parties in Boris Johnson's Downing Street, so that's rather a lot. And they were definitely, parties were going on. I think it's tricky. You can't say it's nothing. But the idea that the Daily Mail would do 7 days of its front page and the Sun battering away, the Daily Mail actually cheating a photograph showing him eating a curry, and it turns out they'd cut out that he was sitting next to Frank Dobson, who died a few years ago. That was pictured
So the
with
ghost
nothing,
of Frank Dobson.
whatever, nothing whatever to it. So, I mean, really, this is pre-election desperate stuff. I mean, he probably shouldn't have done it. But if you've been out all day campaigning with all your people and you're in, you're in the constituency office, it's not exactly going to a party. You're having something to eat and then you're going home.
I guess Boris Johnson would say a bit the same thing about blundering into a room and being ambushed by a cake.
Yeah, well,
Anyway,
we'll see where else we went blundering into, how many garden parties he went and couldn't say. But the point is, really about this, is a sense of total desperation of the Tory press thrashing about, and the Tory party thrashing about on the eve of the election. Nobody calling themselves a Conservative, all local Conservatives. A general sense
it's a
of
question, isn't
panic.
it? Harry, I know you're thrashing around or not.
Thrashing around, I think it's a bit hard.
Thrashing around, but
taking a steady look at things.
it is true that there are a remarkable number of Tory leaflets, and I've seen quite a few that don't mention Boris Johnson. In some cases, have a specific thing saying, "Don't judge us on the shenanigans at Westminster. We're local. We're not really like that lot down at Westminster." Or in some cases, including Dominic Raab's, aren't even in Tory colours at all. His post.
Yeah, I think the Conservative Party in their traditional heartlands of the
In 1.5 miles, at junction 6, take the A355 exit to Slough Central.
With a former minister who's, probably put him on the sensible wing of the Tory party, if you would go that far, who said he cannot quite believe that the poorest ward, the most working class ward in his leafy constituency, is the most solidly Tory, and the more middle class and affluent wards are the ones that are going towards Lib Dems and the ones that are going towards independent candidates. And there's a risk for the Tory party is that their famous realignment in the 2019 election that saw them sweep through Labour's red wall, so to speak, and win in traditional industrial Labour heartlands, it might go too far the other way, because if it fractures the Tory coalition, so to speak, the reason Boris Johnson got such a big majority is because he managed to unite the southeast affluent traditional Tory voters with those new voters. And I think there's a feeling that perhaps he might be beginning to break up, and he's almost gaining more voters in the north, and he's losing his traditional seats in the south.
This is really interesting, Polly. We were talking earlier on in the show a lot about the cost of living crisis, and clearly that is coming up on the doorstep across most of the country, more than Partygate or anything like that. You would think it doesn't help the Conservatives, but there must be a feeling that the people most hurt by this are actually people who don't vote at all.
Probably. I mean, they vote much less, but I mean, an awful lot of pensioners who are going to be affected by this, and they are traditional Tory voters. I mean, overwhelming over 70s, over 65s, over 70s vote overwhelmingly Tory, and they may be thinking again. They've had their pension knocked right back. They thought they were on a nice safe triple lock, and they've had a below inflation, severely below inflation rise, I think what we're getting, though, is a sense of the Tories busy underplaying how well they're going to do. They're managing their expectations right down, saying, well, we might lose 800, 1,000 seats. It sounds as if, talking to people like John Curtis, as if not very many seats are going to change hands.
Is that because of what happened last time, that Labour had a good time last time, and therefore it's actually quite difficult for Labour to make many gains?
What the matter is the underlying vote share.
Yeah, I think that's important. And also, I think turnout's going to be fairly horrendous by all accounts. Postal vote turnout, early sign, looks like it's very low. Rob Hayward, another respected psophologist, a Tory himself, but says he's not expecting that to be made up on the ground with people actually turning up to vote tomorrow.
So that is the big problem for Conservatives. There's less people going straight over to Labour or the Lib Dems or anybody else, but people sitting at home on their hands saying, I'm not prepared to support you right now.
Yeah, but that it is mid-term.
In 1/4 mile, at junction 6, take the A355 exit to Slough Central.
Government 12 years into power to get a good shoeing from time to time. So whether Boris Johnson is the man to be able to pull that back in time for an election in 23-24 is in the hands of the Conservative Party MPs.
Exit at junction 6.
Literally, with a sense of inevitability, we have to turn to Boris Johnson's position, as one always does on these kind of occasions. But it looks to me as if...
In 1/4 mile, at the roundabout, take the 3rd exit onto Tuns Lane, A355.
Oh, no, hold on a second. There are not one, not two, but 3 by-elections coming up. Do you really want to cause turmoil in the Tory party before those 3 by-elections, before Wakefield and the 2 West Country ones as well, where there are big Tory majorities at the moment? And if, we don't know when exactly they will come, but they're coming at some point in the next 6 weeks or 2 months or so. And then we're at the summer, and he's kind of home free until the Tory party conference. So in terms of kicking the can down the road, he's quite an expert can kicker, Polly, isn't he?
Yes, endlessly. We'll wait for the police, we'll wait for Sue Gray, we'll wait for the local elections. There's always something else to wait for.
If necessary, we'll wait for Godot.
Wait for Godot. And all these Tory MPs, who after all the ones who most have put him there, are sitting on their hands doing nothing and saying, well, we'll wait and see what the results or what public opinion is. I mean, what's interesting is that, you
Exit the roundabout onto Tons Lane.
Partygate is concerned, 70% think that Boris Johnson is absolutely bang to rights, and there's been no change in the number of people who think Keir Starmer was wrong about
That might
Beergate.
be out of touch. Those polls will be taken before those 7 front pages, possibly.
No, it was yesterday.
I think there's also
In a quarter of a mile, turn left towards Sippenham Lane.
baked in. Actually, the public, they don't believe Boris Johnson on Partygate. They've made their mind up on that. But Tory MPs seem to cling to this idea. Well, they've made that. That's in the past. Now we can talk about something else. I'm not quite sure that's true.
People are ready to move on now.
Why don't you get the feeling that a lot of Tory MPs feel quite ashamed that on local leaflets there are, things saying your MP voted for is keeping Boris in place, and they're quite ashamed and embarrassed about that. And at some point there must be a point where they say, all right, I can't go on supporting this immoral and corrupt man.
I was thinking this the other day, but actually...
Turn left towards Sippenham Lane.
Tasting already that their threshold for this embarrassment and pain that they are getting back on the doorstep is quite high. They've invested the political capital. They've invested the political capital already. They've already taken the hit on it. Are you then going to blow up the Conservative Party for another summer of inward bloodletting?
It'll be very interesting to see. Polly, were you somewhat dismayed or surprised by Keir Starmer's inability, it seems, to answer fairly straightforward questions, not only about his own behaviour, but whether or not Angela Rayner was at the party and so on? It's gone on and on.
Continue for 1.5 miles.
Either he was badly briefed or he was just slightly maladroit in all those interviews.
Both those things, I think, have been handled very badly. And it was odd that he was sort of not saying whether or not the police had talked to him. I thought, sounds like covering up. Turns out not at all. As if almost he wasn't quite listening to the questions. And then the next day they say, no, the police haven't talked to him at all. And you wonder what on earth that was about. So bungling, really.
I started off the show talking about how much I enjoyed elections. Another reason I enjoy elections is the pressure they put party leaders under. Polly Toynbee, Harry Cole, thank you both very much indeed. Coming up at 10 tonight, it's Nick Abbott, but right now it is, as you know, Ian Dale.
Thanks, Andrew. As if you didn't know, voters in all 4 nations of the UK are going to the polls tomorrow. In our first hour, we'll hear from England, Scotland, Northern Ireland and Wales and test the political temperature. And I want to test yours too. Will you be voting on local or national issues? Have you changed your voting intention from how you normally vote? And which issue is uppermost in your mind? Lines are open 0345 6060 973. At 8, it's Cross Question with Sir Vince Cable, former Evening Standard editor Emily Sheffield, Australian news host Stephen Kinane, and my dear friend Denise Headley is back. At 9, after the news on abortion from the US yesterday, I wonder whether you think our own abortion laws need tightening or liberalising. Or are they okay as they are?
On your radio, on Global Player, and
Play LBC.
leading Britain's conversation. This is LBC.
From Global's newsroom at 7 o'clock, the European Union is targeting Russia with more sanctions, including a plan to ban all imports of oil from the country this year. The EU Commission President says he must pay for his aggression in Ukraine. Attacks in Mariupol, where hundreds of people are still trapped in a steel plant, have continued today. Defence Secretary Ben Wallace says Russia's offensive can only last for so long.
Alliances mean security. That's what history shows. If you look at history where countries predominantly lost, it was when they didn't have friends and allies. And the stronger we are in our integration, the stronger we are in our defence.
Boris Johnson has admitted the country is going through a tough patch as the cost of living rises. Figures from the British Retail Consortium show costs within shops have risen at their highest rate in a decade. Speaking to LBC's Tonight with Andrew Marr, money-saving expert Martin Lewis says there needs to be intervention.
There are a significant number of people in society for whom, even if you sent me to do everything I possibly could, having been the money-saving expert for 20 years, I could no longer reduce their expenditure below their income. Those tools are broken.
The Court of Appeal is reviewing the prison sentences handed to 5 killers. They've been hearing a series of challenges or appeals. LBC's correspondent Matthew Thompson has more.
5 of the most senior judges in the land are now considering 5 cases which involve the use of whole life sentences. It includes an appeal by Wayne Couzens against his whole life sentence for the murder of Sarah Everard. Their judgment will take some time. It will seek to answer fundamental legal questions over when those sentences should be